1956. Elvis Presley could walk into any restaurant in America, sit down, order a burger, and have a normal conversation. 2 years later, 1958, that same action had become impossible. Not difficult, impossible. Something fundamental had changed, and it wasn't just about recognition, it was about the complete erasure of private life. This is the story of the exact moment when fame stopped being a dream and became a cage. When success transformed from freedom into a psychological prison, Elvis could never escape. Before we explore what happened to him, I want you to understand something important. This isn't about gossip or disrespecting Elvis or his legacy. This story matters because it reveals a pattern that destroys talented people in every generation. Understanding what happened to Elvis might help us recognize these warning signs in ourselves, in people we care about, and in the way we treat public figures today. This is about learning, not judging. Let's begin. There's a specific moment when fame changes, not gradually, not slowly, but suddenly like a switch flipping. For Elvis Presley, historical records suggest that moment arrived somewhere between 1956 and 1958. Let me paint you a picture of what that transition actually looked like, because most people don't understand how fast and how completely fame can destroy normal life. 1954. Elvis Presley was a 19-year-old truck driver for Crown Electric Company in Memphis, Tennessee. He made $35 a week. He lived with his parents in public housing. On his lunch breaks, he'd walk to local diners, sit at the counter, chat with whoever was next to him. Nobody knew his name. Nobody cared. He was just another kid trying to make it. July 1954, Elvis recorded That's All Right at Sun Studio. Local radio played it. People in Memphis started recognizing him on the street. But recognition isn't fame. Recognition is people saying, "Hey, I heard you on the radio, that's cool, congratulations." Fame is something entirely different. Fame is what came next. 1955. Elvis signed with RCA Records. He started appearing on national television. The Louisiana Hayride, the Dorsey Brothers stage show. His record sales exploded. Suddenly recognition became obsession. Fans started gathering outside his parents' house. Girls screaming. People wanting autographs at all hours. Reporters calling constantly. The local Memphis kid was becoming a national phenomenon, but Elvis could still, with some effort, have semi-normal experiences. According to accounts from people who knew him during this period, he could still go to the movies if he sat in the back. He could still eat at his favorite Memphis restaurants if he went during off hours. He could still visit friends without causing chaos. The walls were closing in, but they hadn't sealed shut yet. Then came 1956, the year everything changed forever. January 1956, Heartbreak Hotel was released. It hit #1 on Billboard's pop chart and stayed there for 8 weeks, not just a hit, a cultural earthquake. March 1956, Elvis's first RCA album was released and immediately went to #1. April 1956, he made his first Las Vegas appearance. June through September 1956, he appeared on The Milton Berle Show, The Steve Allen Show, and most famously, The Ed Sullivan Show. The Ed Sullivan appearance on September 9, 1956, drew 60 million viewers. 60 million, out of a total US population of about 168 million. That means more than 1 in every 3 Americans watched Elvis that night. Think about that. 1 out of every 3 people in the entire country. After that night, Elvis Presley could never have a normal moment again. Ever. For the rest of his life. That's not exaggeration. That's documented reality. Let me explain what that actually meant in practical daily terms, because I think most of us can't really grasp what total fame does to a human being. According to multiple accounts from people close to Elvis during this period, by late 1956, he couldn't walk down a street in any American city. Not carefully, not with security, not at all. The moment anyone recognized him, which happened instantly and everywhere, crowds would form within minutes, hundreds of people, thousands if he stayed in one place long enough, screaming, grabbing, tearing at his clothes, trying to touch him, trying to take pieces of him as souvenirs. Can you imagine that? I mean, really imagine it? You can't go to a grocery store. You can't go to a park. You can't sit on a bench and watch the sunset. You can't have a conversation with a stranger in a coffee shop. You can't browse a bookstore. You can't do anything that requires being in public as a normal person, because you're not a normal person anymore. You're a commodity, an icon, an object of obsession. But you're not human in other people's eyes. Not really. This is just the beginning of understanding what fame really costs. If this is giving you a new perspective, hit subscribe right now. This is The Man Behind the King. Let's talk about what happens to your mind when your freedom gets taken away, not by force, but by success. Because that's what happened to Elvis. And it's what happens to anyone who reaches that level of fame. The psychological damage is predictable, well documented, and almost impossible to prevent. First, you lose the ability to gauge normal human reactions. Think about it. Every conversation Elvis had after 1956 was contaminated by his fame. Every person he met wanted something from him. An autograph, a photo, a story to tell their friends, access to his world, a piece of his success. Even people who genuinely cared about him couldn't interact with him normally because the power imbalance was too extreme. According to accounts from friends and colleagues, Elvis became increasingly unable to trust his own judgment about people. Was someone laughing at his joke because it was funny, or because he was Elvis Presley? Was someone giving him honest advice or telling him what he wanted to hear? Was friendship real or just proximity to fame? These aren't abstract questions. They're daily, constant sources of psychological stress that erode your ability to connect authentically with anyone. Second, you develop what psychologists call hypervigilance, always watching, always aware, always performing. Several people who knew Elvis described how he could never fully relax in public, even in supposedly private settings. Part of his brain was always monitoring the room, watching for threats, managing other people's reactions to him. That constant state of alert is exhausting. It's a form of psychological warfare that you're waging against yourself 24 hours a day. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to be on for an extended period? A job interview that lasted all day? A family event where you had to manage everyone's emotions? A social situation where you couldn't be yourself? Now imagine that lasting not for hours but for decades, never getting a break, never getting to drop the mask. That's what fame did to Elvis. Third, you lose your baseline for normal life. This is maybe the most insidious effect. When Elvis tried to do normal things, they required so much planning, so much security, so much coordination that they stopped being normal. According to multiple sources, Elvis would rent entire movie theaters for midnight screenings just so he could watch a film. He would rent roller skating rinks and amusement parks after closing so he could have fun without crowds. But here's the thing. That's not normal fun. That's performance. That's an elaborate production designed to simulate normalcy. And simulated normalcy isn't the same as actual normalcy. It might look the same from the outside, but psychologically it's completely different. There's no spontaneity, no randomness, no genuine escape from the cage of fame. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something completely spontaneous, decided on a whim to go somewhere, see something, try something new? That spontaneity, that freedom, that's what makes life feel alive. Elvis lost that in 1956 and never got it back. Fourth, and this is crucial, you start making decisions based on avoidance rather than desire. Elvis didn't choose to stay home because he wanted to. He stayed home because going out was impossible. He didn't choose to surround himself with paid employees who called themselves friends. He did it because genuine friendship with equals became almost impossible to maintain. Think about how that inverts normal human development. Most of us make choices about what we want to pursue, where we want to go, who we want to spend time with, what experiences we want to have. Elvis's life became a series of choices about what to avoid, what situations to not put himself in, what risks to not take, what normal experiences to give up on entirely. That's not freedom, that's captivity with better furniture. And the psychological toll of living that way, year after year, decade after decade, is devastating in ways most of us can barely comprehend. Now let's talk about what fame does to love, to friendship, to any form of genuine human connection, because this might be the saddest part of Elvis's story, and it's something that affects every person who reaches extreme fame. Elvis Presley was married once to Priscilla Beaulieu from 1967 to 1973. They had one daughter, Lisa Marie, born in 1968. The marriage lasted 6 years, but according to both Elvis and Priscilla's later accounts, the relationship was complicated long before it ended. Here's what made it so difficult, and this applies to every relationship Elvis tried to have. The power imbalance was insurmountable. Elvis met Priscilla in 1959 when he was 24 and she was 14. He was already the most famous entertainer in the world. She was a teenager living in Germany, where her stepfather was stationed with the US Air Force. I'm not going to speculate about their relationship or make judgments about choices made decades ago in a completely different cultural context. What I want to focus on is the structural impossibility of equal partnership when one person is Elvis Presley and the other person is anyone else on Earth. According to Priscilla's own accounts in interviews and her memoir, life with Elvis meant living in his world, on his schedule, according to his preferences. That wasn't necessarily because Elvis was controlling or malicious. It was because his fame made normal compromise impossible. He couldn't go to her favorite restaurant. He couldn't attend her friends' parties. He couldn't participate in her world because his presence would transform any situation into a spectacle. So relationships became, by necessity, about other people entering Elvis's controlled environment. Graceland, the private jets, the rented venues, the carefully managed experiences. And in that environment, Elvis had all the power, not because he demanded it, but because the structure of fame gave him no other option. Can you imagine trying to have an honest disagreement with someone when you're completely dependent on them? When disagreeing might mean losing access to everything you know. When the person you're disagreeing with is not just your partner, but also the most famous person in the world, surrounded by people who tell him he's right about everything. Several of Elvis's girlfriends after his divorce from Priscilla described similar patterns. Linda Thompson, who dated Elvis from 1972 to 1976, later talked about becoming more caretaker than partner, watching over his health, managing his moods, navigating the complicated politics of the Memphis Mafia, who sometimes saw her concerns as threats to their access. Ginger Alden, who was with Elvis at the time of his death in 1977, was 20 years old when they met. Elvis was 42. Again, the power imbalance wasn't just about age. It was about fame, wealth, influence, and the complete impossibility of equal footing. Here's the lesson, and it's important. Genuine relationships require equality, not identical circumstances, not the same level of success or money or fame, but equality in the sense that both people can be honest, both people can challenge each other, both people can grow together without one person's reality dominating everything. Fame makes that almost impossible. And the bigger the fame, the more impossible it becomes. Elvis wasn't choosing to have unequal relationships. The structure of his life made equal relationships virtually unavailable to him. We're exploring something most people never understand about fame. Stay with me through the next chapters. This is The Man Behind the King. Here's something that might surprise you. Elvis Presley was deeply spiritual and spent much of his adult life searching for meaning beyond fame and success. Understanding this part of his life reveals how profoundly unsatisfying fame actually was for him, despite what it looked like from the outside. According to multiple sources who knew Elvis well, he became increasingly interested in spiritual and philosophical questions starting in the early 1960s. His bedroom at Graceland was reportedly filled with books on religion, mysticism, philosophy, and metaphysics. Authors like Khalil Gibran, Paramahansa Yogananda, and various texts on Christianity, Buddhism, and New Thought philosophy. Larry Geller, Elvis's hairdresser, who became a close friend and spiritual advisor, later wrote extensively about Elvis's quest for deeper understanding. According to Geller's accounts, Elvis would spend hours discussing questions about the purpose of life, the nature of God, the meaning of his own extraordinary success, and what he was supposed to do with the platform fame had given him. Think about what that reveals. Here's a man who had everything society tells us should make someone happy: wealth beyond measure, Fame that made him recognizable anywhere on earth, talent that changed music forever, millions of adoring fans, every material comfort imaginable. And yet he was searching desperately for something more, something that success couldn't provide. According to various accounts, Elvis struggled with the question of whether his fame had meaning beyond entertainment. Was he supposed to use his platform for something greater? Was there a spiritual purpose to his success? Or was it all just random luck and timing? These questions tormented him because fame and success hadn't brought the fulfillment he expected. Here's a truth that our celebrity-obsessed culture doesn't want to acknowledge. Achievement doesn't equal meaning. Success doesn't create purpose. Fame doesn't answer the fundamental questions about why we're here and what makes life worth living. Elvis discovered this the hard way. Several people close to Elvis described him as generous to an almost compulsive degree, buying cars for strangers, paying off people's mortgages, donating to charities, supporting friends and family members financially. According to some observers, this generosity was partly about trying to find meaning and purpose through helping others, trying to justify his extraordinary wealth and success by sharing it. But generosity, as beautiful as it is, doesn't solve the existential questions. It doesn't answer why you're famous. It doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do with your life. It doesn't create the genuine connection and authentic purpose that human beings need to feel fulfilled. Elvis also reportedly struggled with questions about his talent and whether he deserved his success. According to some accounts, he sometimes felt like an imposter, like someone who got lucky rather than someone who earned his position. This is actually common among highly successful people, this sense that their achievements are somehow fraudulent or unearned. Can you relate to that feeling? Have you ever succeeded at something but felt like you didn't really deserve it? Like someone might discover you're not as good as they think you are? Now imagine feeling that way while being literally the most famous entertainer on earth. The pressure of that psychological weight is crushing. Let me ask you something important. What gives your life meaning? What makes you feel like your existence matters? For most of us, it's relationships. It's contributing something valuable to the world. It's personal growth. It's connection with others. It's pursuing something we care about deeply. Now imagine fame taking away your ability to have normal relationships. Imagine success making it unclear whether you're actually contributing value or just entertaining people. Imagine growth becoming almost impossible because everyone around you tells you you're already perfect. Imagine connection being contaminated by the fact that everyone wants something from you. That's what Elvis faced, and his search for spiritual meaning was, in many ways, an attempt to find something that fame and success had taken away from him. A sense of purpose beyond performance, a connection to something greater than his own celebrity, an understanding of his life that transcended the superficial narrative of the poor kid from Mississippi who became the king of rock and roll. The tragedy is that fame made this search harder, not easier. Every spiritual teacher he encountered had to navigate the complications of dealing with Elvis Presley. Every philosophical conversation was colored by his celebrity. Every attempt to find genuine understanding was filtered through the lens of his impossible fame. So what do we learn from Elvis's experience with fame? What can his story teach us about success, happiness, and the choices we make in our own lives? Because if this documentary is just entertainment, just another story about a famous person's struggles, then we've missed the point entirely. This story matters because it reveals patterns that affect all of us, whether we're famous or not. First lesson: freedom is more valuable than success. Elvis traded his freedom for fame, and he regretted it. Not publicly, not in ways that would have damaged his career, but according to people close to him, he mourned the loss of normalcy constantly, the ability to walk down a street, to have a spontaneous conversation, to be anonymous. These aren't small things, they're fundamental human experiences that make life feel alive. How many of us make similar trades without realizing it? We pursue success that requires sacrificing time with people we love. We chase achievements that demand giving up activities that make us happy. We build careers that slowly erode our freedom until we're trapped in golden handcuffs, unable to leave even when we want to. Elvis's story is extreme, but the pattern is universal. Before you pursue success, ask yourself what you're willing to give up for it, and be honest about whether that trade is worth it. Second lesson, relationships need equality to survive. Elvis's relationships failed not because he was a bad person, but because the power imbalance was insurmountable. When one person has all the power, genuine partnership becomes almost impossible. This applies to all of us, even without fame. In any relationship, professional or personal, massive power imbalances create dysfunction. The person with more power can't get honest feedback. The person with less power can't be fully authentic. Both people suffer, even if it looks like advantage from the outside. If you have more power in a relationship, actively work to create space for honesty and disagreement. If you have less power, recognize how that affects your ability to be genuine and consider whether the relationship is serving you or just serving the other person's needs. Third lesson, achievement doesn't create meaning. Elvis had every achievement imaginable and still struggled to find purpose. Because purpose doesn't come from external validation, it comes from internal alignment, from doing something you believe matters, from contributing value in ways that resonate with your deepest values. What are you pursuing right now? Is it an achievement you think will finally make you feel successful? Is it external validation that you hope will make you feel worthy? Is it a level of success that you think will solve your problems? Elvis's story suggests that none of those things work the way we hope they will. Meaning comes from connection, from growth, from contributing, from aligning your actions with your values, not from achieving status or accumulating wealth or gaining recognition. Those things might come as byproducts of meaningful work, but they're terrible goals in themselves. Fourth lesson, isolation destroys us. Elvis became progressively more isolated as his fame grew, and that isolation was ultimately more damaging than any other factor in his life. Human beings need genuine connection, not superficial interaction, not transactional relationships, not people who agree with everything we say. Real connection with people who see us as human beings, who challenge us, who care about us independent of what we can do for them. Are you isolated right now? Not in the extreme way Elvis was, but in the everyday ways that slowly erode our well-being. Are you surrounding yourself with people who only agree with you? Are you avoiding difficult conversations that might lead to genuine growth? Are you prioritizing achievement over connection? Elvis's extreme isolation should make us more aware of our own subtle forms of disconnection before it's too late, before the patterns are too entrenched to change. Fifth lesson, we need to recognize the warning signs in ourselves and others. Elvis's decline wasn't sudden, it was gradual. Years of increasing isolation, years of relationships becoming more unequal, years of searching for meaning and not finding it, years of making choices based on avoidance rather than desire. The people around him saw it happening. They knew something was wrong, but the structure of his life made intervention almost impossible. By the time someone tried to help, the patterns were too established to break. Don't wait until crisis. If you see warning signs in your own life or in someone you care about, address them now. Increasing isolation, inability to accept feedback, relationships becoming more superficial, achievement without fulfillment, searching for meaning in all the wrong places. These patterns are dangerous, and they're much easier to address early than late. Final lesson. Fame is not what we think it is. Our culture worships fame. We pursue it. We envy it. We consume endless content about famous people's lives. But Elvis's story reveals what fame actually is, a form of captivity that takes away the fundamental freedoms that make life worth living. That doesn't mean we should pity famous people or absolve them of responsibility for their choices. It means we should stop worshipping fame as the ultimate achievement. It means we should value freedom, connection, and meaning more than recognition and status. It means we should build lives based on what actually creates human flourishing, not on what society tells us we should want. Elvis Presley was extraordinarily talented. He changed music forever. He brought joy to millions of people. His legacy is real and valuable, but his personal life was, by many accounts, lonely and unfulfilling in ways that all the success in the world couldn't fix. That's not a failing on his part. It's a structural reality of extreme fame, and understanding it should change how we think about success, happiness, and the lives we're building for ourselves. That's the complete story of when fame stops feeling like freedom, the moment success becomes captivity, the psychological reality behind the legend. What resonates most with you from Elvis's experience? What patterns do you recognize in your own life? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this documentary gave you a new perspective on fame, success, and what actually creates meaningful life, subscribe to The Man Behind the King right now. We tell these stories with depth and respect because they teach us how to live better. Share this with someone who's chasing success without thinking about the cost. Thank you for spending this time exploring the human reality behind the legend. Remember, freedom matters more than fame. Connection matters more than achievement. Take care of yourselves and each other.